it's not normal. It's not normal to have a steady state. It's not normal to expect things not to be constantly changing. And I think a lot of what we sort of try to impose on ourselves, both in our lives and also in our sort of businesses as well, is very much, a lot of structure and stability and sort of always trying to lock everything down. I think I'm naturally a person that thrives in a sort of like ever-changing, complex environment, which is probably why I enjoy nature. I enjoy the fact that it's changing all the time. I love that it will look totally different tomorrow than it did today, depending on the weather conditions and the seasonality and everything. So I think just embracing change for sure.
I'm Jessica Smith.
And I'm Diana Denka.
And this is Executives in the Wild, a podcast that interviews remarkable leaders and changemakers to understand why being connected to nature is so crucial to their happiness and professional success, and how it's helping them to make a positive difference in this world.
We want to showcase inspiring guests who have successfully integrated a connection to nature into their lives. We want to give our listeners a beacon of hope that there is a better way to lead in these uncertain times, one we can all lean into if only we dare to step into the wild.
So today's guest is Dr. Kat Bruce. Welcome. Thanks, Kat, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Kat is passionate about the interface between science, business, and policy, and the potential of these sectors to interact for mutual gain. She founded NatureMetrics Limited in 2016 to bring to market novel molecular tools for biodiversity assessment. Her work has enabled organizations worldwide to monitor nature with greater precision, supporting conservation and sustainability efforts, and provided an unprecedented evidence base for decision-making in environmental management, while dramatically increasing the speed and reducing the cost of biomonitoring. Kat holds a PhD in tropical ecology and DNA metabarcoding, and has pioneered the use of environmental DNA, eDNA, to assess biodiversity, bridging the gap between research and environmental management. Kat is also a board member of the Kelp Forest Foundation, which aims to establish the value of wild and cultivated kelp forests as powerful nature-based solutions for climate and biodiversity. Kat is also an expedition leader with trips to the Peruvian and Ecuadorian Amazon. She has twice taken on the GB Row Challenge, the 3,000-kilometer rowing expedition around the UK, where she collected environmental data on her row. Her leadership journey, both in science and extreme adventure, reflects her passion for uniting research, policy, and business to drive positive environmental impact. Well, what a CV, what a bio, Kat, and thank you again for joining us. We'd love to hear a little bit more about yourself and your story, and how did your love of nature really start?
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. It's such a privilege to chat to you guys who in your own right are just some amazing leaders in this space. I know a lot of people sort of say, oh, I always knew I wanted to work in nature and the environment. That wasn't necessarily the case for me. So I've always found it quite interesting looking back and sort of seeing where this came from. But I think a lot of it really actually goes back to my grandparents. So I was brought up in a family where, both of my grandparents were professors of geography. My grandmother was a glaciologist and was a fairly serious alpine climber, and she used to spend her time leading expeditions of students up glaciers all over Europe and around the world. And my grandfather studied ancient lake beds in Africa and sort of desertification. And they were actually some of the sort of really earliest researchers looking into climatic history and climatic change. And so that was just, that was like the background that I grew up with. And we used to sit, we'd have family get-togethers at our house at their house in Cambridge, and put on the old slide, get out their old slide sets and look through the pictures of their expeditions in Africa and up mountains and all sorts. And so that was just, I think it set this sort of expectation that the world is this incredible place, and that you can interact with it in that way, and that there's a lot of amazing sort of adventure and stories to be had, and also really important research to be done. But I then spent a lot of my time. I was disillusioned by geography at school. In my head, geography was all, and the sort of natural world was all about glaciers and deserts and things. And then the reality of studying geography at school was about mapping the central business district of Cambridge and doing pedestrian routes. And so I was massively disillusioned with the whole thing. And so it went completely the other way, and I actually studied like ancient Greek and Latin and things. So I'm going to break the mold in my family and sort of not go into this, nature space. So I tried really hard to do something really different, while all of our holidays were in mountains or sort of on mini expeditions, it wasn't until I found myself at Oxford University studying ancient Greek, and sort of kind of just woke up one morning and was like, why am I doing this? That's kind of by definition of the future, I'm not quite sure why I'm here. And so I took the first of what have been sort of quite a number of fairly radical left turns in life, and didn't know what to do with myself. So I did the classic thing in my family of going somewhere as far away as possible, and ended up in the Ecuadorian Amazon, really quite by chance, and not really knowing that the Amazon was in Ecuador or really anything about it. And that completely changed my life. It was very much everything I've done since then came from that sort of, what was initially 3 months living sort of, 100 miles from the nearest road, in pristine virgin rainforest in Ecuador. It's been a journey since then that I couldn't have predicted in a million years, but have sort of just followed my nose and kept putting sort of one foot in front of the other and having my eyes and ears open, and just enjoying the ride.
Great.
Wow, that is quite an incredible journey, Kat. I'm wondering, reflecting back on this, of course, the origins with an influence of proximity and the love for nature, growing in your own family and having some exposure to that, and then later on discovering the Ecuadorian Amazon. I have not seen a more biodiverse forest ever in my life, so it resonates. I only visited for a week, but I wish I could spend months there, because it's just incredible. I mean, that's how nature used to be, I guess. Elsewhere as well. How do you think that over time your relationship with nature has evolved, and what it is today, if you can reflect on it?
I think every time I spend time in nature, my respect for it grows. I think nature is a complex and powerful force. There's often a sense that nature is associated with sort of calm and beauty and peace and everything, and very often that's not the case. Nature is brutal and powerful and uncomfortable a lot of the time. Like the first couple of weeks in the Amazon, and still every time I go back there, the first week I spend thinking, like, why did I think I liked this place? It's so uncomfortable. Everything's trying to eat me or sting me or bite me, or and I'm dripping in sweat and I'm too hot, and it's not until you've got through that and you come out the other side that then it's like you have the privilege of witnessing and experiencing those glimpses of the real, just stunning beauty, and I think the more that you then just spend real time and you sit and you slow down and you see and you hear and you learn and you never stop understanding more about there's this infinite amount to learn and get to know, and I just think that's my respect for it just keeps growing, and my I think for me also it's always been about, it's never actually just been about nature itself. I've never been one of the, I'm very much from a sort of conservation background, but it's never been just about conserving wildlife. And I think I felt a bit out of place in the conservation community originally when I went back and started studying, because for me, actually, it's about the links between the people and nature, and the way that we interact with and can collaborate with nature, or how you balance those relationships. And I think what took me to the Amazon, what took the expedition that I was part of to the Amazon in Ecuador at that time was an indigenous community who owned 53,000 hectares of this beautiful rainforest, but they knew that there was oil underneath it. Knew what they were at risk of, because they had seen what had happened in the northern half of the Ecuadorian Amazon that had been decimated by oil exploration over the last 30, 40 years. And they wanted some protection against that, and to be less vulnerable to what the oil companies would come in and offer them. And so, we were doing surveys to get the evidence base, to get reserve status on the land, and also looking at tourism to be able to bring in an alternative, more sustainable form of finance that could give them those things that they wanted and needed, like access to education and healthcare and things, without having to take the money that was offered by the oil companies. So I think, have that being my first full-on exposure to this world, and so many elements of just that one experience, I think still drive a lot of what I sort of do and see today, and the things that I still think are, absolutely vital and complex.
Brilliant. Well, that seems like an incredible strategy and an incredible experience to be a part of. Kat, one of the things that Diana, Robin, our producer, and I have been reflecting on to do with nature is the seasonality. And nature goes through these cycles, through seasons, and there's growth. You have, some periods that are for hibernation and rest, and, there's some parallel with our, human growth and our changes and processes that we go through. So is there anything that you've learned about nature that helps you in that kind of rhythm of a year?
I think the sense that it's not normal. It's not normal to have a steady state. It's not normal to expect things not to be constantly changing. And I think a lot of what we sort of try to impose on ourselves, both in our lives and also in our sort of businesses as well, is very much, a lot of structure and stability and sort of always trying to lock everything down. I think I'm naturally a person that thrives in a sort of like ever-changing, complex environment, which is probably why I enjoy nature. I enjoy the fact that it's changing all the time. I love that it will look totally different tomorrow than it did today, depending on the weather conditions and the seasonality and everything. So I think just embracing change for sure. And I know that having worked with a lot of people over the last 10 years, not everybody feels comfortable with that, but for me, for sure, it's a really core part of how I thrive.
Yeah, it certainly is the case that corporate and business life is very much favoring the predictability, the stable, the constant growth, every day and week being like similar, because that's what you can plan with, right? And you want to be able to plan for the future. But I really love when you say it's become what we expect of ourselves as well. That's powerful, because we are part of nature, and we're definitely not the same every single day.
Yeah, and we evolve and grow and learn, and I think I've definitely got more of the sort of ADHD type brain, and so they're sort of always searching out sort of, what's new or what's next, or how might you build on this into something else. And so I've always sort of pushed against boundaries, I think, and sort of pushed against trying to put things in boxes and trying to sort of over define, and that has its pros and cons. But ultimately, particularly in spaces that are changing and moving very fast, I think it gives you a lot of resilience. And I think that that's what you see in nature as well, right? That ability, the ever-changing nature of nature is sort of what gives it its ability to adapt over both long and short time frames. And one of the things I love about nature, and the reasons that I sort of think of nature as being the kind of the secret weapon in the fight against climate change and everything else, is that it does have this ability to bounce back given a chance. And you just take away the pressures, and put the right give the right foundations, and within a very appreciable time frame, you can see things coming back. And I just think there's so much hope in that, and there's so much that we can draw from it.
Yeah. And Kat, thinking back in moments that you spent in nature, can you recall one where you were so awestruck or you were so touched that you thought fundamentally what you believe about life or your perspective on life has changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's happened to me a few times. I think that, for sure, I have a few moments sort of seared into my mind. The earliest of which really was during that first Amazon trip, sort of floating down a river at sunset, doing a bird survey, and just being so still and silent within what at the time was a very still, sort of peaceful world. And the sunset just came out like this, and the macaws were all flying over, going back to their roosts, and you just think like, wow. I mean, like what a privilege to be in these places and to see these things. And that I've always associated that sort of moment, which wasn't a sort of earth-shattering moment, but it stuck in my mind as being like the point at which I was like, okay, this is what I want to sort of spend my life protecting, and being part of. But I think in a similar way, or similar, different, the time that I've spent at sea in a tiny rowing boat. I spent a month in 2022 going around Great Britain in a 10-meter long rowing boat, and the being particularly, I mean, we had a big storm, one particular big storm in the Irish Sea, and it's scary. You're like, to start with, you don't know if you're going to come through it. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to be safe, and you have no option but to sit in it and to be in it, and to start learning its rhythms and being able to predict what's happening, and understanding the water and understanding the weather, and you build your confidence and you build your comfort in that situation. And it's amazing how fast actually we can adapt to these new situations, and you can sort of feel comfortable in a situation that felt so uncomfortable just a very short time ago. And I think, that was an amazing experience, because I didn't realize at the time how much I was taking from it. And it wasn't until I came back from the sea and came back into a sort of work environment that I realized my perspective on the sort of professional environment, and the sort of skills and confidence that I brought into that space was so different. And that was partly, partly from having gone through those really uncomfortable times, partly from having really brought home a sense of perspective about what does it really mean when, everything's at stake, what's really important and what's not. And just gave me a lot more confidence in a whole range of different situations, and also having had to work as a team in a very intense environment where literally if you get it wrong, like all of your lives are at stake, and having had to collaborate with people I didn't know that well to get through those times teaches you just an enormous amount.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kat. I think there's immense power in pushing ourselves out of the comfort zone, and spending time in nature, and these expeditions will certainly do that for you. Just a very quick reflection. I was climbing Kilimanjaro, and it was extremely difficult to summit, much more than I ever thought it was going to be, partly because of lack of oxygen. And, but going through it, I realized what was the point where my mind was ready to give up, where I would have told myself in normal circumstances that it's enough, I can't do it anymore, and just turn around. And for reasons there, I persevered and I went through it. And actually being on top of that mountain, I realized, oh my God, like, what if I persevere to the same extent in daily life? How soon we quit things just because it's uncomfortable, and nature teaches you not to.
Great. Well, Kat, you've spoken before about the GB 2022 Row Challenge and what an eventful time that was for you and how it shaped you as a leader. Could you tell us more about that experience and where has it brought you today?
Yeah, so it's sort of, it sort of dovetails, I guess, with my journey with NatureMetrics, which has been an interesting one for me, because I never set out to be, to run a tech company. Like, that was never in a million years in my sort of life plan. And so I've always called myself a bit of an accidental entrepreneur. And I started the company really just out of amazement that the tools we were using in research had so much power to give insights into what was happening in the environment. And contrasting that, as I was writing up my PhD thesis and sort of summarizing everything we were able to see through this data that we were generating, and realizing how little data was actually in the hands of the people who were on the front line of environmental management and conservation, and the really almost complete lack of evidence-based decision making that was able to happen. And I thought, well, we've got this tool here that can change that, and if we're not careful and know how the academic world works, and we could sit around for 15 years sort of debating the finer details of the science of this, and we can already see that it's a step change in what can be done. And actually we need to get this out there, and we need to get it, and it will also adapt and evolve and become better by using it and by putting it in the hands of people who need these sorts of tools. So it was really just that sense that this needed to happen, and I couldn't see anyone else who was going to do it. And so therefore, let's go and try and see if we can sort of start something and start the process of doing that. So we did it, but I had no idea. I'd never even worked in a company, let alone tried to run one. So it was, again, just a hugely uncomfortable experience. And I felt like I was in the dark most of the time, getting things wrong most of the time, like learning either by Googling things or by trying it and getting it wrong. And someone said, oh, you should have done it like that. Okay, fine, great. Now I know. And a lot of trial and error. And so, and in some ways, when you start a company, what you know is that, the stats are that most of them don't work out. So in a way you think, well, what have I got to lose in trying? Like, it probably won't work anyway. And then it's almost more terrifying as it does start to work, and you're like, oh my goodness, what have I done? What have I started? Like, and people are backing you and believing in you, and the investors are giving you some money, and which at the time, now I look back, it's tiny little bits of fundraising that we did, but to me, this was more money than I'd ever seen in the world. And the weight of that was, it meant a lot, and clients have believed in this new technology, and they're paying us money, and people have come to work for us, and all of this stuff. And I'm sort of sitting there thinking, I feel like I'm just holding it together barely. And I sort of have this sense of where we're going, but not really of how to get there. And so I built the company up over sort of 3 or 4 years to, nearly about 20 people or so. And at that point, I was really feeling like my lack of experience was sort of really the limiting factor to what could happen next, because I just couldn't quite figure out what needed to happen or how to get from A to B. And I also had I'd done too much, and I burnt myself out in quite a spectacular fashion. And so at the beginning of 2020, I'd actually handed over the CEO role to somebody else who had some more experience of running businesses, and also had an environmental background. And it was a huge relief for me to do that. But I wasn't quite sure then what I brought to the table and what my role was and what my sort of value was. And you're sort of worried about stepping on people's toes, but also sort of, where they've got more experience. So that was another sort of uncomfortable time in a different way. I can't think when I've had comfortable times, actually. Maybe everything that's worthwhile is uncomfortable in one way or another. But so I then went through this sort of long period of trying to sort of find my place, but not really being sure what it was. And actually, by the time I got involved with the GB Row Challenge, which was a total accident, and they'd come to me because they wanted to put eDNA onto these boats, which they had ocean rowing boats, which they'd customized 3 identical boats, and they customized them to add it to do automated collection of microplastics and sound recording with like underwater sound, temperature and salinity. And then they wanted to add eDNA. And so they came to us. I think they wanted a discount. And one of my colleagues who just started working for us said, you'll need to talk to Kat about that, but she'll love this because she's a rower. So before I knew it, he'd volunteered me to get in one of the boats, and the rest was history. But by the time that came along and sort of brought together the expeditions, the eDNA, and the rowing parts of my lives, I was really starting to think that probably I needed to at this point start transitioning out of the business and think about what was next. And I was felt quite ready to do that, actually. And I felt like going off and doing an expedition, reconnecting with that part of myself, being back in nature, would be just a good sort of way to start that process. And so it was such a surprise to me that wasn't what happened, and that I actually came back from the row and had this opportunity to re-engage with the business in a completely different way, and with newfound confidence in sort of teamwork and leadership and a sense of perspective, and I was able to walk into the business and see a period of growth and lots of new teams coming in, and I could sort of walk straight back in and see where lots of people seem to be butting heads, but I could sort of go, oh, hold on, you guys are saying the same things as each other, but just with different words. You guys all got, you've all got a point, but like, this is more important than that. This needs to connect to that, da, da, da. And suddenly I was like, oh, I can see where I'm useful, because I can actually sort of stitch everything together and talk the language of everybody, from like the people in the lab doing the DNA work all the way through to people thinking about, how does the sort of nature and climate sort of business worlds happen, and how is this whole market evolving? So it massively took me by surprise and sort of kickstarted, I think, just for me a phase of involvement in my own business that I hadn't expected.
Thank you. Well, Kat, the company from the outside has always looked like a smooth upward curve of success after success, but it's reassuringly human to hear your story of how how you've reflected on your role and the role that the GB Row played in shifting how you approach the company.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does seem like you draw quite a lot of resilience from these extended times in nature, which are the expeditions that you're going on. How do you balance the demands of your career today with a need for more quiet, reflective time in nature? Are you always going on an expedition, or do you have other secrets as well?
I think I'm constantly trying to figure that one out for myself, to be honest. I think if you're not careful, there are so many different sort of pressures and demands on you and your time that I've learned from experience, you burn out and actually you stop being useful to anybody, and you stop being good at the things that you're good at, and so you have to be quite intentional about not allowing that to happen. And I know for me, I need to draw on spending time away and in nature, and I learn so much from it. So this summer I took on the GB Row Challenge again, and this time leading it, and we put together a group. Actually, based on the previous one, I came back and I felt like it was an unbelievable experience, but our narrative had been very negative because it was all about, we've got to collect this data because of all of these threats and pressures and all of the bad things that are happening. And all of those things are true, but I knew from my day job that there's projects happening all around the coastline that are showing that we can turn this around. We can bring back nature back, and you put together all of those small local stories and you have a big picture that is actually way more hopeful and way more positive than you would think from a lot of what you hear. And those are the stories that have the power to really sort of inspire other people to get involved and make changes and get involved. And and I felt like, actually, at New York Climate Week a couple of years ago, I was speaking to Chrissy Durkin, who is an acoustic specialist, and we've ended up on a lot of panels and things together. And we were chatting about this, and we were like, wouldn't it be amazing to do that, but to have a team of all women who work in nature and climate and can help tell those stories from different perspectives and use it to tell the stories of all of those local actions that sort of build up into something bigger. And so we, a couple of years ago, came up with this idea to put together this team and go and do the same thing again. And that's what I was doing this summer. And it turned out to be, super inconvenient from a work perspective. Because we had, at the time I was taking a bit of time back. I'd sort of gone down to 4 days a week, etc. And then we had a change of CEO, which involved having to step back into the company and take interim leadership for a while, and then recruit a new CEO. And then we ended up doing a big fundraise right at the time I was supposed to be going off on an expedition. And that's hard, because there's all of these strings pulling you in different directions, and you can't fulfill the obligations to everybody all the time. And I knew that for me, I needed to be able to go and do this, and that if I didn't, I wouldn't be putting myself in a good position. I actually wouldn't be helping the company. And so I went off this summer, and leaving the company in very capable hands of our senior leadership team that we have now. It was another huge learning experience. This time things didn't go entirely to plan. The weather has been, we talk about changing climate and predictable weather systems breaking down, and that's what we experienced out at sea this year. And all of the prevailing winds that were supposed to be there to help us weren't. And it was kind of fascinating hearing from people who we were engaging with, who spend their lives at sea, how unusual this was and how unprecedented it was, and how nobody had ever seen winds coming from the north in July in this part of the world. So fascinating. But again, so we didn't manage to make it all the way around, and we had to complete the trip over land. And we thought, actually, we can't, the sort of physical challenge isn't going to happen, but the mission was about more than that. The mission was about telling the stories, and engaging with those, and we can still do that. So we went by land to visit the communities and the projects, and therefore we're actually able to talk to them in a way that we wouldn't have been able to from the boat. And some of those experiences were like some of the most powerful and inspiring experiences that I've had for a very, very long time. And so again, I think it's been an exercise in resilience and in adaptation and making the most of things that don't go quite how you expect them to, but also just giving yourself a chance to have experiences, to be places and to listen and see and learn. And I learned things that, I never would have expected. And again, it comes back to people and the power of local communities who know and depend on their local environments. We talk about it a lot in the global south, but seeing that here in Great Britain and seeing the power of a community that are taking action to protect their local environment was more impactful for me than I could ever have imagined. And I'm somebody who feels like I already knew that that's all important. So you think, if it's that impactful for me hearing those stories directly, think how impactful it is for people who don't hear them all the time. So I've got come back with lots of ideas and sort of renewed passion and a sense of why we're doing all of this.
When can we hear about that, Kat? In what format are you telling the story? So, and when is it releasing?
Yeah, so we will. We're sort of building up a sort of program of, storytelling through social media and things. But we're also putting together a film. So we're working with a producer from the US. We captured a lot of footage all the way around. We filmed some amazing interviews, both interviews with the people that we met and then our own reflections as a team on those. That will be sort of hopefully being put together over the next year or so.
Beautiful. Make sure to let us know the social media handles to follow.
Yeah, we will do. So we're called the Sea Change Row. We've got Instagram and LinkedIn and a website. But there was we were sort of doing really well with telling the story as we went along, and then as everything sort of changed, we didn't do so well at keeping up with the sort of storytelling on the go. But actually, I think in a way it's been really nice to do that and then reflect on what I think we understood more afterwards, sort of what it all meant, significance of it. So I think we can tell a much more powerful story with a little bit of that reflection time.
Well, Kat, it's clear that you are giving back to nature through your whole career, and all your personal endeavors as well. Is there anything else that you want to mention in terms of how you give back to nature, whether it's financially or a rewilding project or anything else? You don't have to. You do enough. But if there is something else you want to mention.
Yeah, I think it's something I'm actually trying to figure out at the moment, how I can most effectively give back. I think, my day job with NatureMetrics is about trying to connect up all of the dots and ultimately try to use data as both a storytelling and engagement tool to inspire and activate, but also to become this sort of common language that can connect all of the different stakeholders in nature. Because, so much of this is about collaboration, and if we're going to turn things around for nature, there's no forum in which the phrase radical collaboration is more appropriate than in the nature space. And it means bringing together everybody from financial institutions and banks and big corporates all the way down to local communities and indigenous people and ecologists on the ground who know how to work with the land. And these are people who and groups who have very little history of working together and very little trust actually between them, and a big part of that is not having a common language. So for me, one of the things about data is really about providing that common language that is meaningful to all of those different levels, perhaps in different ways and perhaps different aspects of it. But if you're all coalescing around the same information, you can start building that trust and ultimately sort of accelerating finance down onto the ground to where it needs to go, and into the hands of the people who can best use it. And I think at the heart of it, that's the mission that I have with NatureMetrics. But it's very easy while doing that to sort of almost find yourself getting further and further away from the ground. You're the level at which you're speaking and the conversations that you're having and the people that you're talking to sort of get higher and higher and further removed from where this all started and ultimately where we need the money to go, where the action needs to happen. And so, I think that's why I find it so powerful every time I go back into nature and I go back and work in like really hyper local contexts, and really just like reinforce how much can be done ultimately with not a lot of money, by people who really care about and know and understand and depend on a natural environment. So I think, for me over the next few years, I want to try and build up a bit of, some real longer term involvement with, some places that I can really get to know, because I think that grounding is so important for all of the rest of it. So I haven't, I'm just starting to join the board of trustees of a new charity around marine protected areas. I'm on the board of the Kelp Forest Foundation, and I think sort of starting to get involved in those sorts of things is a way that I can give back, and take some of what I've learned and seen and the connections that I've built and the network that I've got and the experiences that I've had, and sort of make those available to others who are more connected to the ground.
Kat, you obviously have this longitudinal view. You started your childhood being exposed to glaciers that tell us a story over thousands of years of alpine pastures. You've been to the Amazon, you're rowing around the UK, you're collecting data about how our ecosystems are changing on a day-to-day. How do you think this time in nature has impacted the way you think about the future? And how do you envision a future relationship will be between humans and nature?
That's an interesting one. I think you've got to keep optimistic. I think I do feel like I'm a sort of stubborn optimist, and because I think if you don't believe that we have these pieces of the puzzle, we know what we've got to do. The journey that I've seen, my goodness, when I started NatureMetrics in 2015, I was asked, who on earth would pay money to know about nature? It's not important to anybody. It's just people's hobbies or, tick box exercises. I had to start, when I went out and raised funding, I had to start everything by telling everybody what biodiversity is and why anybody should care about it, less than 10 years has gone past, and that landscape is so different. And that, the speed at which nature has sort of shot up the agenda to sit not just alongside the climate agenda, but deeply within the climate agenda, and the recognition that, it's like everybody just woke up and this light bulb went off and went, oh, nature's kind of important. If you don't have healthy, natural functioning ecosystems, you don't have a global economy. The ability to feed the world, you don't have any chance of meeting your climate goals, and so and that coupled with the fact that, like I say, you can do something about nature, and it does have this resilience and the capacity to come back in time, within time frames which people can see it and appreciate and get that positive feedback sort of cycle. So I think those are the things that keep me sort of positive and sort of really motivated and passionate about doing this. You need those stories to come through of where things are working and changing. And you don't need everything to change all at once. You need enough to change to create a critical mass to, change incentives that then change the standards. And I think we can do that. But it is tough. It's tough. And I'm sure you find this as well. It's emotionally exhausting, sort of maintaining that positivity when you also totally know and recognize, the other side of the coin, which is nothing that we're doing, nothing's fast enough, nothing is enough. We have so much further that we need to go, and there is so much around us that feels so difficult to control and too big to feel like we can do anything about it. So I think it's a tough place to be, but I'm so glad I'm on the nature side of the coin, because I think there's also there's so many amazing people working in this space, and I forget, that's not the same in every other work sector that you might be working in. When we go to conferences and big meetings and things, it's genuinely a joy, and it's just so wonderful to connect with all of these sort of other really passionate people who are bringing their full energy and skill set and everything to trying to solve these challenges. So got to believe it's going to work.
And I concur. Some of the people in nature, you feel that people are all in, mm-hmm. And it's a really, lovely, wonderful, dedicated group of people. And I think that optimism, you have to get more intentional about, keeping that optimism fed. And, do you feel that this love of nature, I know before you talked about sometimes it's hard to love nature when you're, being bitten by things or chased by things. But do you feel that this love of nature is important for people to be able to make that contribution to regenerating our planet?
Yeah, I think it is important. I also think it's just incredibly powerful, because I think that people do sort of naturally and intrinsically love nature. This isn't something that you actually have to spend a lot of time trying to teach people how to do, because for most people, they have already some connection to, places. And it's so tangible, it's something that people, it's part of how they identified themselves. And you can always tap into things that within people's experiences that would be sort of personally emotional to lose. And so I think it's our secret weapon in mobilizing people and driving behavior change. I'm not sure we as a community have really done enough to use that. And I think that there's so much to come, and there's so much opportunity for using storytelling and using, experience and immersion and emotion and all of those things to tap into the why people would make a change. And you can start with small things, and you can see small changes. You can't do that with carbon. You can't, invisible molecules so much less easy to sort of care about on a deep emotional level. So I think, we need to use that.
If you think back of all the encounters you had with nature and all the instances where you felt you were learning something or got an insight, what is the greatest lesson that spending time in nature has taught you?
Nothing works in isolation. Nothing exists without being dependent on everything else. Nature is insanely complex, and it's these insanely complex systems that you can't always see at a glance how things work. And that's one of the things that I love about science. It's sort of starting to sort of unpick and understand some of these interactions that are not necessarily super obvious. And I think that goes all the way through what we can learn so much about how we can be successful in life and in business and in solving some of the biggest challenges that we face as, you know, as humanity from that sort of complexity and interconnectedness of nature. I think, you know, you get so much further by collaboration than you do from competition. I think, and you know, that reflects itself all the way through. Yeah, like I really challenge some of the sort of core assumptions about what it means to do business. I really push back against like the very sort of, you know, macho, ego-driven, sort of aggressive business styles. I don't think it's necessary to be successful through much more collaborative approaches, both sort of internally and externally. And that also, you know, like, I mean, our business has always been led by women. We've always had female CEOs, and I think, you know, some of the ways that women work and work together, to massively generalize, are sort of much more fitting for collectively having success in areas like this, where failure is about more than just the failure of any one business or initiative or project or whatever. You know, there's too much at stake. So I think, yeah, seeing I think when I zoom, nature allows me to zoom out and sort of recognize how sort of small and insignificant and inadequate we are as individuals, but how powerful you can be if you come together. And I think that will be with me.
You know, we're interdependent with nature, with humans and nature, but also with each other. And this is a term that it feels like this is my turn to bring in Plum Village, because it was coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk that founded Plum Village. But this idea of interdependence is so powerful. It really is wired into our being, and yet we manage to create that illusion that, you know, you are out there on your own and you need to care for yourself only. And of course, some of the scientific views of survival of the fittest created that kind of economic logic, but that economic logic won't get us into the future, where the crisis that we're faced with affects all of us, even if not fairly everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And even, you know, an expedition will fail if you don't work together as a team, and if you don't put your own sort of egos and ambitions to the side. And when you're making important decisions in whatever space you're in, you know, I think that collaborative, consultative sort of, you know, approach is always going to be what is more effective.
So, Kat, we close out every interview with 4 quickfire questions. So the first one for you is, what is your favorite place in nature?
Oh, the Pantanal. I love the thing I loved about the Amazon in many ways was that you couldn't see everything. So you had to work hard, and you had to do your time and spend the time before you were sort of rewarded with seeing things. But I always wanted to go. I always wanted to go to the Pantanal and see all of the things that I've not seen. And there's an amazing trip that you can do if you've got the time. From Bolivia, you can go through a national park called Mercado, which is hard to get into and hard to get through. And you can follow the rivers all the way through there, across the border and into the Pantanal in Brazil. Never had a chance to do that, but always wanted to.
Next, do you have a favorite piece of art, book, poetry, film, or other that really connects you to nature?
Weirdly, the book that's been most inspirational for me, I think, is one that I read years ago, actually, when I just spent that first 3 months in the Amazon in Ecuador. And I read a book called Savages by a guy called Joe Kane, who was a journalist with the New York Times, who had been invited by the chief of the Waorani tribe to go and live with their communities and see what was going on with the fight against the oil companies. And he went and ended up spending a year living with them, sort of as they were really trying to fight for their lands, and ultimately losing that battle against the oil. And I think that was what, sort of having had that experience and then read that book, which built on the experience that I just had, and really sort of extended my understanding of what was going on out there, was probably the biggest factor in my sort of jumping with both feet into this whole world.
So closing out, what is one thing you would recommend to our listeners who want to better connect to nature?
Spend time in it. Like get to know places. And nature makes you slow down, I think. Actually, that's one of the things that I have loved about all the time I've spent in nature. It forces you to slow down. And I'm terrible at doing that in the rest of my life.
Thank you. That was very insightful, Kat.
Thank you. No, it's been great to have a chance to reminisce and sort of think through some of the connections. But it's always fascinating having those opportunities to sort of piece together some of the connections between different parts of who you are and different parts of what you do in life, and sort of really realize how much they are interconnected, and they all sort of, they're not really separate at all. Yeah, it's been really wonderful to talk to you today.
Hi, Jess. What did you think?
Yeah, I liked what she was saying about spending time in discomfort, because effectively when you go through any new experience, you have discomfort, and being able to kind of go through it and get through to the other side and know that you'll survive and you can do it again is really an important lesson. So yeah, I took a lot away from what she was saying.
Yeah, and how she brought it back to the way she shows up as a leader and how she runs her business now with that new perspective that she got through time in nature. But you know what I really loved where she ended as well, the how it's all connected in nature, and it's really impressive to hear that from a scientist, from a researcher, where you are actually forced to separate things and single out a certain segment of the universe that you're going to be looking at with a magnifying glass. But her field of research through the eDNA is such that she's really able to see how things are interconnected and they link up, and how everything in nature is linking up, and then to bring that perspective into leadership and how we show up to each other is really powerful. It resonated a lot.
Yeah, she emphasized teamwork so much, and the rowing, I think, does, when you row, you are as fast as the slowest rower on the boat always. So I had also rowed, not as well as Kat, but in the past, and that was definitely the lesson that comes out very strongly from rowing. I also liked how she reflected on avoiding burnout, and as someone who, all of us like to take on a lot and hope we can accomplish a lot, but we have to be mindful of our limits as well, and make sure that we have that regeneration time, and both the big periods of regeneration and also the day-to-day regeneration, and setting those limits. So she really, as a very successful business person, she has a lot to share and offer on managing that.
Yeah, and how she said nature forces you to slow down. I think that's one of the key lessons here, is that you cannot regenerate until you allow yourself to slow down. Ambitious people will find it hard to allow themselves to do that.
So nature is the medicine for ambitious people.
I think so, yeah. Should be prescribed.
Great. Well, that was a super episode, and we're wrapping up this episode of Executives in the Wild. I'm Jessica Smith.
And I'm Diana Denke.
Executives in the Wild is created by Diana Denke, Jessica Smith, and Robin Agustin. Those involved in the podcast are doing so in a personal capacity, and views expressed are not necessarily associated with their employers. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Executives in the Wild, or go to executivesinthewild.com, where you can sign up to be a part of our community. Please support us by subscribing and sharing this podcast, available on YouTube and most outlets including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.